pivoting a little bit to talk about financing and how you, the team, the commission thinks about how they're going to finance projects. So can you tell me a little bit about the factors that you all consider when you're determining how best to fund and finance larger transportation projects in the state?
Sure. So, when I was CFO of the U.S. Department of Transportation, the saying we would run around the building yelling at everybody was funding is not the same as financing. It was remarkable how much this seemingly obvious thing had to be brought up, right? We are fortunate that the system of toll lanes that our associated enterprise has and is putting into place provides a funding mechanism and not financing funding mechanism for certain year-over-year expenses with those toll roads, right? If it's in a congested corridor like parts of I-25 and I-70, the fact that there's ongoing demand to use that managed toll lane means that each year there's going to be X amount of revenue that comes in and is available for funding. What that means in terms of financing is that over time you can kind of predict what the future revenue stream will be and either take out a loan against it or use forms of bonding or otherwise, which allows us to finance part or all of some of the larger projects. So, it doesn't work everywhere, right? And it works better in urban areas than rural ones and better in denser areas than less dense ones. But for those big projects that are in population centers, the ability to kind of pull in some revenues off of the choices that people make to use that managed lane and then think about what that can bring in over several decades means that there's options to partially pay for some of the big projects. It is probably never going to work on our more rural roads. So thinking about where it works and why, and then where it doesn't work and why is just part of being realistic about what kinds of solutions this works for. And in terms of whether there's a private party or not, because of the enterprise structure, there's actually often the ability to do some of these loans using federal programs through the enterprise. And whether or not you need to bring in a third-party concessionaire is actually a separate question than whether you enter into a financing agreement.
Switching slightly, although I can see how technology plays into all of this. So technology is more and more a piece of the equation in our daily lives, from our phones to transponders, the whole spiel. What do you see as the most significant technology issues and advancements in the transportation arena? And this could be in Colorado, or this could be something you're seeing elsewhere that you ultimately hope you'll be able to bring to our state.
I think the kind of ongoing sophistication of technology touches every space that we work in, right? Like we were just talking about tolling and managed lanes. The way that you collect revenues will continue to change over time, right? The like easy pass boxes when they were new on the East Coast, however many decades ago, were very cutting edge at the time. Like that's probably not where toll revenue technology is going to be 10 years from now. There's already prototypes for things like phone apps that allow you to do it, much like a parking app would. Mm-hmm. I think that the integration of sort of technology into every aspect of our roadways also is something that is mainstreamed in a way that it didn't used to be. I think the average traveler doesn't realize how much we rely on the feeds that come in a place like a tunnel, right? I mean, there's so much technology that underlies, how those arrow signs that show whether it's open or closed, right? Yeah. And a lot of the roadways are really reliant on the kind of digital communication that's happening, behind a transaction like that. And that's on the infrastructure side. On the vehicular side, the whole nature of cars is in flux, right? I mean, the EV sales in Colorado for last year just came out, and I think it was 10.5% of new cars sold in Colorado this past year were electric. That's that means that the challenge of getting adequate charging infrastructure and making sure that people know how to, interact with the technology in an electric vehicle is not a tomorrow problem. It's like a right this minute problem. And that, for us, how you kind of connect the grid of places where people can charge is vital to being able to travel the distances that people do here. So, the cars themselves, the kind of roadway management, all of that has technological components that are very different than 50 years ago and even 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And I suspect that EV car number would be much higher, but supply chain issues.
Absolutely. There was a piece that CADA put out last week where Tim Jackson basically said that, what we're seeing now is the result of people being willing to wait on a very long line. And it's true. So the curve on people switching to different kinds of vehicles is not linear. And as soon as the big companies figure their supply chain issues out, I think we're going to see that transition happen even faster, which means that getting the infrastructure in to be able to make it possible for people to charge can't happen fast enough. And fortunately, we're getting some federal assistance for that as well. Our colleagues at other agencies are working on pieces of it too, but there's a whole set of business models around that piece as well.
Sure. So when you get together with your colleagues, other executive directors around the country, I would imagine that there's broad-ranging conversations that happen from workforce development to climate policy. Can you describe what you see as CDOT's biggest accomplishment within that national conversation? What are your peers coming to you and asking about?
I think we're getting incoming on a lot of fronts. I mentioned the workforce stuff earlier. I think there was a funny thing that happened last year where there was a reporter for, I think, the New York Times trying to write a the sky is falling story on snowplow driver shortages. And they interviewed us and we wouldn't say it. I mean, we started talking about all the things we're doing to recruit and retain and, help cultivate, new practices to be able to deal with the challenges. And they wouldn't quote us. But I think we're getting attention for everything that our maintenance division is doing, whether it's the role that they're now playing in building housing for our workers. That's something that others are having to deal with also. But, also the commercial driver's license program that we run. We're just starting our 5th class in the last year or so. We've trained well over 100 operators.
Really?
Yeah. And certainly we're getting a lot of incoming from our partner agencies and the local governments who are like, can we get in on this program too? But it's distinguishing itself as a national model for how you deal with kind of a generational transition in a workforce where the planning wasn't done 30, 40 years ago and COVID accelerated the need. I think our climate work is seen as a innovative case study where there's not a lot of other models of states who've done it in a way that works. So a lot of people are watching, both the fact that we did it and how it plays out on the ground as we make it actually work and looking to those lessons learned. And, I think generally our projects are seen as having a pretty good success rate.